Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hi and welcome to the ISO Show. If you're new to the ISO Show, then welcome. Thanks for joining us. And if you're a seasoned ISO Show listener, thanks very much for listening. And we really do value and appreciate all your comments and suggestions that you leave. In fact, one of the questions that we've been asked is, how do we change certification body once we're already certified? So that's the topic I'm going to cover today, which is basically, obviously it's not applicable for those of you that aren't certified to an ISO standard. I'm afraid it's only going to be applicable for those ISO Show listeners that are already certified to an ISO standard. So in some cases, and I have to say, not that often, some companies do get really fed up or frustrated with the certification body that they're currently with. Now I have to say, on the whole, accredited certification bodies are great. You know, the vast majority of them do an absolutely superb job. But it has to be said that over the last 14 years, we have come across the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'm afraid. And so it's at that point where, you know, you might be going back to the certification body with a complaint or an issue and you're not really getting anywhere. So you think, well, actually, it's time to look elsewhere. So this podcast is going to guide you through what you need to do. But before we begin, let's just look at why do companies change certification bodies? So there are a number of different reasons. One of them can be that they just can't get hold of anybody within their certification body to help them. This is quite often the case. So the company is trying to inform the CB of the change in their business, and the CB's either not listening or just not adaptable. A company might be frustrated with a lack of organisation, so not keeping the client informed of any changes. Or, we have had a case where we've had an assessor showing up to audit the wrong standard or on the wrong day. It doesn't go down too well with companies that are expecting an assessor to turn up to audit them against a particular standard, and they're not there to do that. So then that just comes down to lack of organisation on the CB's part. We have had cases where a certification body just isn't listening to that client and they're just not being flexible. So we've had a case with a company and they've got half a dozen sites across the UK. One site, there's only 3 employees and very little in terms of processes. There's literally, it might just be a sales team, for example. And the certification body has allocated a day and a half to assess them. And to be quite honest, the assessor would have completed that audit within a couple of hours easily, and they're just going to be twiddling their thumbs and just sat there not really doing anything or adding any value. So in those sorts of situations where the client's gone back to the certification body and said, look, what are you going to be doing for a day and a half, because there's only 3 people there and we've only got a couple of processes, and the certification body hasn't been adaptable, then that client might look elsewhere. The company might not be happy with the assessor that they've got. Now, in my opinion, this is not a valid reason for changing certification bodies, because more often than not, that certification body will have hundreds of assessors, and that assessor may have just had a bad day, or they might be doing an assessment against their own agenda, their own personal agenda, and not the ISO standard. So you can quite easily ask to change your assessor at the end of that visit. Okay, you don't want them coming back again. So you can make that crystal clear to your certification body. And you don't need to necessarily give a reason. You can just ask for a different assessor. But I don't think that's a valid reason to actually change certification body, because that's just down to one individual. Another reason why companies might switch is just the perceived lack of value that they're getting. And this could be from a number of different reasons. It could be from an experience like an assessor showing up late. Supposed to be there at 9 o'clock, they show up about 10 o'clock, they leave at 2 o'clock, and they don't get the report sent over to the client for another 2 to 3 weeks. after chasing by the client. So for me, that's not acceptable. I would raise that as a complaint. And if that sort of thing isn't addressed, then that again could be a valid reason to move certification body. Again, if that certification body is not listening to you. So why do companies switch? So we've talked about lots of different reasons for switching, but why do they actually switch? Well, at the end of the day, it's because you can. You're the customer, you have a choice. Don't feel as though because you're certified with a certification body, and by the way, that contract's valid for 3 years, that you can give notice and switch. Okay, if you're not happy, of course you can switch. Okay, so you might want to switch as well because, during COVID-19, some companies are really struggling financially and they might just want to go out there and get some comparative costs. Okay, so that's another reason for switching. Or it could be that companies are growing through acquisition and they are looking at just getting another perspective on their certifications across a number of companies that they might have within their group. Or that company is expanding internationally, and in which case the certification body that they're with doesn't necessarily have an international presence. So they might have a great reputation here in the UK and market share in the UK, but they don't have a presence in other countries. So that's not really going to be of much help to them. And it could actually be more costly to get certified because they might have to fly assessors out to those other countries, whereas an international certification body may have resources on the ground in those countries. So it's going to be a lot more cost effective and you might get a better overall service. So if you are looking at switching, how do you make that switch? Well, it may vary from country to country, but here in the UK, if you're certified by a legitimate certification body, so that's one that's got the UCAS badge, that's the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, the UCAS badge, which is the crown. It's not just the tick, it's the crown and tick. That's how you know you've got a legitimate certificate. It's really easy to switch. Okay, you can go from one UCAS accredited certification body to another free of charge. No hassle. In order to be able to do that, you just need to make clear what your scope of certification is and your requirements. So the sites, services, the standards, just make that clear. So in effect, it's what's written on your current certificate at the moment. So that's really easy. But you might want to consider your timings for this. Should it be before the next surveillance visit or after? Okay, so just look at the timings. If you've got 6 months until your next surveillance visit, you might think, yep, that's fine, we can do that, that's no problem, that gives me enough time to get quotes and get the assessors in. Or you might want to give yourself a little bit more time to plan that. I'd also recommend getting at least 3 quotes from other accredited certification bodies and explain that you would like the quote on a like-for-like basis across the period that your certificate is valid for. So you will know that your certificate is valid for 3 years. So if you're 18 months in to that contract, you need a quote for the remaining 18 months and the recertification. The recertification is important, okay, because that's where you have your renewal at the end of the 3 years. Okay, so the reason to get costs on that is because it does vary quite significantly from one certification body to another. But if you've just completed your 3-year cycle and you're looking at the next 3 years, again, you're getting a quote for the 3 years plus recertification. That's really important. So some certification bodies might just charge 1 day as a normal, almost like a normal surveillance visit, but some class it as a strategic review. So they'll look back at the previous 3 years, looking at lessons learned, trends and that sort of thing, and then looking ahead to planning the next 3 years. In my view, that's a value add. In other types of certification bodies, they might come in for 6 days to basically go through an assessment all over again. And you might think, well, is that fair? Do we want that? So it's different from one company to another. Some might really like that, others might not. And they might just think, well, actually, we're really happy with this management system and we would value just one day for the strategic review. So again, get all of those costs from those certification bodies and you can make that comparison. And also, I think if you've not had a great experience with your current CB, you want to explain that when you're going out to tender as well. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to go from one certification body and having a crappy service and going to another where they've got similar issues. If you are keen on having an assessor with certain sector industry knowledge and experience, you can request that. That could be a factor. Or if you are looking for improved customer service, you might want to request a key account manager. So things to consider when you're doing that RFQ and when you get those quotes back in. Obviously, number one is going to be costs. What's it going to cost you? But also things that you need to look at are things like, what sort of resources has that certification body in terms of assessors? How many do they have on payroll? How many assessors are actually outsourced? Okay, now some may say, it's a good thing to have them all on payroll because they're all following that management system. So that can be a great value add and they know that certification body's ways of working. So again, that's something you might want to consider. And I'd ask that question for the specific standards that you're certified to. You also want to look at the continuity of assessors. So are you likely to get that same assessor year after year? Now, of course, there's no guarantees. But again, if you've got a certification body where you've got a number of certification bodies on payroll or really regular, reliable subcontractors acting as assessors, then you might get that continuity of service. And that can be really helpful because you're not having to explain your business to a new assessor every single time. Although I would recommend changing that up maybe every 3 years or so because you're getting that kind of fresh pair of eyes on your business, providing you with a different perspective, can also add value too. You might want to ask about the location of assessors. We have had some clients where assessors have been flown in from other countries. And also, if you've got an environmental policy on reducing mileage, then you don't want an assessor coming from, Scotland if you're down in London or vice versa. And also, I think it's worth asking the question, what kind of experience does that certification body have in your sector? Okay, or even with the standards. So we deal with a lot of niche standards here at Blackmores, things like Collaborative Relationship Management Standard ISO 44001. There are actually only a handful of certification bodies here in the UK that certify against it. Okay, so it's worthwhile just exploring about, which standards they're actually accredited to offer certification to and what their credentials are in that space. And then finally, you could also explore what extra value is that certification body going to bring to your business? Not just when they turn up to do the assessment, also any other things that might help, not just you, but also your team within your company. So that could be things like webinars, white papers, events, so standards updates, things like that. They can all add value as a service provider. So hopefully that's helped you to look at different options if you are looking at making that switch for the certification body. We can help if you do need any advice or support on that. We offer a free service to send an RFQ, that's a request for quote, to a number of certification bodies so that you can get a comparative quote. So we don't have an exclusive relationship with any one certification body. We are independent, but it's just a free service that we offer. So that's all from me for now. I hope that's been helpful. Oh, actually, one thing that we will be doing next year is providing a directory of recommended certification bodies as well. So that's one to look out for in 2021. So once again, thanks very much for listening. And I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to achieve certification to an ISO standard or just need a helping hand with ISO compliance? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com.